Hi everyone. Today we are delighted to welcome Evelyn van Kelle and Gien Verschatse to discuss their book Collaborative Software Design, along with Kenny Baas-Schwegler, which was published in October last year. Evelyn and Gien are recognized experts in collaborative modeling and organizational decision making for socio-technical systems. So in this book blog session, we'll feature a conversation between the authors exploring why making domain modeling decisions can be challenging. So with that, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Apologies for our hard names to pronounce. That's sorry to be from the Netherlands and Belgium. So shall we start with a short introduction round, Gien? Is that something we could do?
Absolutely. You can kick it off.
I can kick it off, sure. So I'm Evelyn, or Evelyn in proper Dutch, and I'm working as a consultant for a company called Xibia. And in that consultancy role, I mainly focus on socio-technical systems, and I have a background in more of the social science part, so cognitive psychology, behavioral science, and that's also where I focus, what I focus on in my client assignments. I'm also a trainer, and of course, I wrote this book, so the collaborative modeling part is a really big part of what I do as well, because this is really where the technical and the social part come together. Because we put people together in a room, and then a lot of stuff is happening, and I'm a big fan of everything that happens there, from the social dynamics that are flying around to the technical outcomes. So that's basically who I am, what I do. What about you?
My name is Gien Verschatse. I'm from Belgium. I'm a consultant at Aardling. I was a software developer for about 15 years in a variety of languages, and then I slowly grew towards architecture and software design. And now I help people, companies, to improve their current software systems. And one way that we do that is by using some principles, tools, and techniques from domain-driven design, which is how I got, acquainted with collaborative modeling. And so that is how I offered my expertise in the book there.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and we're missing one of the authors. So as
Yes.
Ivan already said, Kenny couldn't make it today, but of course, a very necessary and valuable contribution to the book. So we'll try to manage without him in this conversation, in this session. I think we're just gonna talk a little bit about the book, and we came up with also some questions on that we've been asked by others, that we've been asking each other. So I think we're just gonna get started with that with that conversation. So maybe the first one to answer for you is, why did we found it necessary to write this book? Why did we really want to share our insights and experience about the topics that we had? Why did we think that was a good idea?
Oh yeah, I would ask myself that a lot while I was writing it. Evelyn, why are we doing this? No. So the thing is that I have a technical background, and that was going quite well. I could learn a lot of things, new programming languages, new libraries, new frameworks, all that kind of stuff. The thing that I struggled with the most in my job were people. How do you communicate with them? Why are they upset when I said this? What's going on? All that kind of stuff. So throughout my career, I started to understand that being very good technically is just not enough. If you want your ideas to be embraced in a company, you also need to be good at people. And I was not very good at people when I started out. So that sort of took me on a journey on learning to understand communication and culture and people in general more, reading a whole lot of books. And then I thought, you know what? I also checked out how are decisions being made, that kind of stuff, my out of hand hobby.
You cannot call it a hobby anymore. I think it's kind of your expertise
Oh.
now, but still, yeah.
It's my hobby. I'm gonna keep saying it until the day I die. It's a hobby that's gotten out of hand since I helped to write a book about it. How to make good decisions is in the book as well. So when you and Kenny started talking about this book and you asked if I could join, I thought it was great because I felt that, there need to be more books inside the software industry that actually talk about the socio aspect of socio-technical systems.
Yeah.
So how did you and Kenny came up with the idea?
Yeah, well, I fully agree with you, right? And we've been discussing this as well, but we also were missing like a book or more books on like how does this social technical thing really work, and how do you balance everything that you have to deal with whenever you do collaborative modeling, which basically means you put all relevant stakeholders and domain experts in a room, and they should come up with something. And then, of course, yeah, like you said, the biggest struggle usually are humans. And so my journey is a bit like the opposite of yours, because I am better in the human part, and I'm not as good as you and Kenny are in the more technical part. And Kenny and I linked on the domain-driven design topic, and in that community, this is also where we met, of course. And we were starting to give in talks and writing more about this stuff and how it really balances each other out and how it impacts each other and how technical choices have social implications and the other way around. And we started to talk more, and your expertise on decision making was, of course, also a huge part of what we're doing, and especially in collaborative modeling, because we have to make design decisions. It's literally in the title of our book. So yeah, it's a very important aspect. And I do think that these differences that we have, both in personalities and in backgrounds and in expertise and in interest, I think that really helped shape the book and make it even better. And of course, the differences also sometimes led to discussions and maybe even conflict. But it was always functional conflict, right? We could disagree with each other, but we also found a way to deal with that in a proper way. And eventually, the book, by doing that, I think became a real hands-on practical guide on both on how to do collaborative modeling while facilitating also the social dynamics that are in there. So I think, yeah, that really made the book. But maybe before we dive into this too far, a short summary or a short explanation on collaborative modeling, or how we see it or how we define it in our book, maybe that would help.
Oh, you want me to set that definition by heart? No.
No, but just from our experience. I'm not asking you for the correct definition, because I don't know it by heart either that we use it.
I almost have it, I think. Collaborative modeling, it's a visualization technique for conflict-laden decision making. Where you have a whole bunch of stakeholders in the room. And what you want at the end of it is a shared understanding. Okay? So those are the key points of collaborative modeling. It's actually not something that comes from the software industry. It's applicable in other industries as well. An example of that is water resource. When countries have to decide which group of people get to have how much water. When there is a water shortage, collaborative modeling is also something that they use there. But for us, for software specifically, what this means is that we sort of have our traditional way of getting business requirements, which is mostly by just talking to people. And then the analyst writes it all down and then hands it off to the software developer. And then the software developer converts it to code, and then we push it to production. And then that first person who did the explanation goes like, well, this is not what we asked for.
Surprise.
Surprise. I had a few of those experiences as well in my career. And so what collaborative modeling actually says is, you know what what if we take all these people, these stakeholders, we put them in the same room. We use a technique that is visual so that we can direct the conversation. And we make sure that everyone is on the same page of what actually happens in those business processes and how they should be converted to code.
All right. And would you say that it always works like anywhere in any company, or are there any conditions of which you think like this should be there before you can do this? Or
that's a tough question, because instinctively I want to say yes.
Yeah.
But of course, in my experience, it also heavily depends on company culture. Sometimes you have a very sort of siloed environment where you have the business and it's completely separated from the IT departments. There's almost no communication, and even sometimes inside the IT department you have maintenance, and you have customer support, and you have the software developer teams, and you notice that people are not talking with one another as they should. So if you don't have a company that is willing to break down those silos, if you have domain experts, if you people who know the business, and if they're not willing at all to even participate in it, then I would say no. I mean, you can try within your own team as a software developer. You might already get a lot of value from that. You might get a lot of value from just doing it on your own. You're trying to map out visually how everything goes, just to get to have something to work with all the words that are being said. But you do need a willingness to try at the very least.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I was the question popped up because a lot of people are asking us this question. Of course, like, hey, it sounds like a great thing to do. Can we just start? But indeed, I think like the social part here is a big deal, because if there's a lack of trust, or people thinking, but what happens within the development team should stay within a development team, then I think there's a lot of challenges that you might encounter. And at the same time, like you said, even doing it on your own might help, because just having a visualization of a problem that you're about to tackle or want to solve, that can, we do it also individually, because it can help you think in a different way. But if you really if your goal is to get a shared understanding of what's going on amongst all stakeholders and domain experts, and I think your culture should be part of that, let's say.
Yeah. So to the audience, a few examples of tools that we use for this. It's the event storming. You have your very classic user story mapping is out there. You have domain storytelling. You have example mapping. You have the business model canvas. Some of these are in the book and sort of explain how they work. But basically anything that makes a conversation visual is something that you can use to do collaborative modeling. So that's the great news. Even boxes and arrows already help when you're talking, I feel.
Sure. Yeah, and the language, right, that's being used. So whenever we do some collaborative modeling sessions, and the goal is to get a shared idea or shared understanding of the problem that you're facing, then it should be a language that everyone understands, meaning that we are not talking in highly technical language, but we're really talking about like what's happening so that everyone can understand. I think that's a huge part of the collaborative modeling part, the language.
Oh, absolutely. I remember this. I went for drinks with this friend a while back, and they had a rough day. And the reason they had a rough day is because they had meetings, and all they did in those meetings is pointing that people were talking next to each other. And it was like, you do know that's not what they mean at all. And then to the other group, you do know that's not what they mean at all. And so even if you're using different words and you put that down, you can start asking very direct questions. Like you use this word domain, but then another scenario, for example, you use the word subdomain, talking about domain-driven design. Are they actually the same thing? Or are you talking about the same thing? And sometimes my customers are talking about the same thing, and sometimes they're not. And then you can make that very explicit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the word customer in itself triggers me when you mention it, because this is always a word in collaborative modeling, especially if you put multiple stakeholder and domain experts in a room. Everyone means something different with the word customer, which can be a big source of frustration, I think, in these sessions. So the language part is huge, and this is also why we spend a lot of focus and attention on that as well. So really making sure that everyone means the same thing with some of the important words and concepts that are being used in the visualization tool, whatever it is that you may be using.
Yeah. So the collaborative modeling, there's a social dynamics, which is your area of expertise.
It's where the fun starts.
Yes. So what are a few of the things, when you talk about social dynamics, what does that mean and how does that apply to collaborative modeling?
Yeah, and this is a huge topic, right? So this is also why we decided to dedicate several chapters to social dynamics, because in essence, like you said in the beginning, we have a plan, we start doing something. Yes, we're going to do collaborative modeling, and then what can go wrong? Well, usually it's the people that can go wrong because they have to collaborate and do something together, and they all bring their own baggage, let's say, to such a session. And we also might refer to them as shadows in the book, and that's basically the shadows of people. That's everything that we cannot really see, but it is heavily impacting a session and the outcome. So everything that's not in a shadow or that's in the top of the iceberg model is also something that people might be familiar with. This is what we can see and what people do and what people are saying, but there's also still a lot going on beneath that surface line, let's say, and we call that the shadows in our book. And those might be emotions or hidden conflicts or opinions or perspectives, or hey, I'm just not feeling well because there's a lot going on today and I just don't want to be here, for example, or all of the conflicting interests that might be there but are not explicit. So everything that's happening internally that we don't necessarily see but is heavily impacting the outcome of an event storm and the event storm or the collaborative modeling session itself. So what we did in the book is we took a look at, so what are some of these dynamics or some of the stuff that happens within a group of people, and how we describe them, how can you recognize them, and how can you facilitate them, because the facilitation part is a huge deal in collaborative modeling. And once you are more aware of these shadows and be able to recognize them, then that's a huge help in doing collaborative modeling. So an example of this is, and a very important example, I think, is ranking. And ranking is a dynamic that's always there. And it basically refers to the social hierarchy in a group. So how do you, where do you stand compared to the rest of the group? So in a group, there's always a social hierarchy. And that's not a bad thing, because sometimes people think negative associations, blah, blah, blah. But it's good because it helps us to make sense of an environment that we enter. So when we enter a group, we have all these social dynamics and cognitive biases that help us make sense of the situation that we're in. So it helps us to determine, where do I stand compared to the rest of this group? So where am I placed in a way? At the same time, it also impacts our behavior. So, for example, you might be wondering in a collaborative modeling session, or in basically in any session, why is that one person always starting to talk first? Or why is this one person always quiet? Or why is this person interrupting everyone all the time? Like, these kind of behaviors might be very annoying, and I agree, but I learned more objectively, but it can be very annoying. But this might have a lot to do with this ranking concept, because if we are higher in the hierarchy, so if our ranking is higher, then we might be seen as more powerful, we might be feeling more powerful, and it might be making us act like, hey, I need to talk first because I'm up here in this social ranking hierarchy, so my opinion might be important, for example. But it might also be a reason why someone who might be just in the company or just in the team, it's just he's not been there for a long time, think, whoa, I'm entering a room with a lot of people who know way more than I do and have way more experience, and maybe I should just lay low for a bit and don't necessarily express everything that I think and that I'm feeling and that I want to add to this outcome. So where you place yourself in the social hierarchy might heavily impact your behavior. And what we want in collaborative modeling is we want to have all of the knowledge and wisdom and expertise of the entire group mapped in the visualization. So whenever people are staying quiet, then we are missing a lot of it. We're missing out on wisdom, and that's not what we want. So as a facilitator, it's important to have a feeling of how this ranking thing is going. And if you observe, so for example, someone being very quiet or someone starting to talk always first or interrupting people, then that might be your sign as a facilitator, like, hey, maybe I need to do something here. And I think that's a very important skill. But the whole ranking part, I mean, you probably have examples as well, right?
Yeah, I was thinking of for people who have never done collaborative modeling before, so like one of my frustrations with working in software is this junior, mid-year, senior developer thing, and how a company treats the junior developers can tell a lot about how they see all of this. Like, I've worked in companies where as a junior, you were not consultants, you had nothing important to say.
Right.
And so that means that people are giving a very low ranking to this junior profile.
Explicitly.
Yeah, while true, there's a reason why we need experience over years. Some things you need to learn by going through it, but also like someone who has not been doing this for 15 years can point out my flaws, because I have a way of reasoning that has been working. And so someone who does not understand where is she coming from can actually ask very interesting and helpful questions to improve the design and architecture that I made inside a company. So it doesn't really matter that you're junior, but sometimes people just are like, no, they're junior, like they're not worth consulting at all. What do they have to say? They just graduated.
Yeah. But and that's why I think it's a responsibility, especially if you're higher in rank and if you are aware of this dynamic, which is why it's so important to be aware of this dynamic. That if you are higher in rank in a certain group, then it's also your responsibility to share that rank. And you can do that just simply by asking questions to people that are lower in rank. Like the example that you said, hey, this is what we think, but what do you think about this? Or what's your input? Or how would you challenge this? Or what would you do different? Or do you have any alternative options or suggestions? I think that's a very big responsibility when you are higher in rank. And this also what we see in collaborative modeling sessions.
Yeah, like if we go from explicit, like the junior, mid-year, senior is very explicit in rank. It's why they're there. We have same as CTO and all, but we also we talk about implicit ranking, which means that there's this sort of set of rules that we have where we judge people by, and we take them higher or lower than us due to that set of rules. One that I actually noticed with myself years ago when I had to adapt was accents in English. So when people were not fluent in English or had a very heavy accent, I noticed that I actually, considered them less in ranking because of that. And that's something that sort of happens. And it's not good. But, I started saying that, no, you have to be careful. And make sure that you don't do this anymore. It's very difficult to learn a new language.
Yes.
So, well, it's very difficult to learn a new language. And most people are always talking in English, so they're always talking outside of their native language. And I was, in a way, in the Flemish region, we're good because we don't do dubbing. And so my English was always quite fluent because I heard it a lot when growing up. It was always there and we had subtitles. But if you come from a different country, they do that dubbing. And so they're not that exposed to English. And so it will take time. And they're, outside of their native tongue. And so you have to take that into account and make sure that you don't add judgment to that. So that was one for me.
Yeah, and even, I mean, the judging part, of course, is just something we always do. So I think the biggest advantage that you then have is you are at least aware of what you're doing, and you can account for it in how you act according to what you're thinking. Because the whole ranking part and these traits or characteristic that we use here, again, it's not necessarily a bad thing, because it's just how we make sense of the world. But we have to be aware of it, and we have to be aware that these are very context specific, right? Because we are conditioned in a way, all in this different groups that we are part of, in the different cultures that we are part of, to look for these kind of traits or characteristic or skills, or that we use to rank ourselves. So I think it all really starts with being aware of it and being able to recognize it in sessions. And this is also what we focused on in the book for all of these social dynamics that we're describing. How do you recognize them? What can you actually observe without your interpretations? Because that's the hard part, right? The observing without judgment part.
Yes. No, leave the judging to the cats.
Yeah, that's usually what we say. Yeah, because our cats are very good at the judging part, and they they have been judging us a lot, actually. But now that we like I think we should also address then another important part in the book, which is the decision making part, right? So we spend also quite a lot of attention to the decision making part, and I think it's a great part, because I also learned a lot from it on how I make decisions and when it's a good decision or a bad decision. But maybe you can tell a little bit more about your out of hand hobby, as you call it yourself. What do we mean with a decision in our book?
Yes, so I think one of the major ways that it changed my perspective on decisions is I was like, this is not going well. Everywhere, like, people were not good at making decisions. I'm not saying I was good at making decisions. It's just that decisions in meetings weren't really working. And so I tried to find a way to improve that. And one of the things was that I went to economics. And in economics, they actually teach decision making. And so I thought, like, great. And so I started buying all their books. And the way that they frame a decision is quite different than the definition I had at that point in time. So a decision is, most people see it as there's a snap, and then the decision has been made, and you have a before and you have an after, and you have a point in time. But they sort of redirect that a bit, as a decision is actually a process. It's not a point in time anymore. It's a process. And they say there need to be a few things present. If you want to make a decision, you need choices. You need more than one choice. So you need two or more alternatives.
Yeah,
because
otherwise it's not really a decision to make. Yeah.
If there is only one option, then you don't have a decision to make. And when you're designing your software system, your architecture, often we have this illusion that there's the solution and there's only one good solution. And that's not true. There are multiple options, and we have to try to find one that fits best for the context that we're in. So that's one of the things I do now. I always make 3 alternatives. Once you get 2, then you can easily find a third by combining points from 1 and 2. And they don't all have to be, excellent options. It's just that you need to generate options to get more options. So that's it. You need alternative, you need options. And it's also the point of when have you made a decision that I thought was interesting. And they say that you need to have allocated resources to it, which is a very economical and fancy way of saying that there's a cost in being wrong.
I really like that sentence. There's a cost in being wrong. That was actually an eye opener for me. And I got reflecting on some of the decisions that I made. And there's a cost in being wrong. Then Yeah, that's one of my favorite lines in the book, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. And so over time, the cost of being wrong grows.
Yeah.
If you're just at the analysis part, well, you have some time and some spent on it, but the cost is not big. If you're almost done with implementing your new design and you realized you picked the wrong one, well, then your cost is quite, enormous at that point in time. The thing is, you can still change your mind. You can still say, we will pay this cost and we will redirect and adapt this decision that we made.
Right. Yeah.
So there's never this point of no return. There's never this thing of, but it's been written in stone. It's just that in order to find out at the earliest convenience that we picked the wrong alternative, we need to implement sort of feedback loops and evaluations and see how it's going to make sure that the cost we pay is as little as possible. Because while you're changing your software system and your design, the context in which you're operating also changes, and some new information comes to light which you didn't have a year ago, and all that kind of stuff. And so to just freeze a design and then push it to production, which takes a lot of time, we say, like, don't do that anymore. That is not how you make design decisions. That's sort of, I think, the most important part of how we look at the design decisions in the book.
I agree. Yes.
Yeah. And then I think we also talk a bit about clarity, where I learned a lot from you and Kenny on you have democracy, and you have deep democracy in there as well. And then you can make decisions in an authoritative manner, and the way you communicate that is very important. So make sure that everyone understands how decisions are being made, who can make a decision, things like that, and make sure that's clear before you ever start the analysis part. Yeah,
because that's one of the biggest frustrations, right? I mean, it's very important to be clear about, like, what level of influence do you still have when it comes to a decision? Like, are you still talking about, is it just an idea, a proposal, or is it already like almost made decision? And be very clear about that, because nothing is more annoying than when you think you still have some influence, or you still have something to say about a decision to be made, because someone might ask you, hey, what do you think about this, or what should we do? And then in the end, and then you give your input and your ideas, and then in the end, yeah, but we already made the decision. And then so you actually didn't have any influence anymore, even though you thought you did. So it's very important to be clear about what the level of influence still is. Like, is this is this an autocratic decision or a democratic decision that we're going to make? So you have to be very specific about that, and don't ask for input if there's no room for input, because that's very, very annoying. At least I think that's very annoying.
Oh no, it's hugely annoying. I think everyone who's hearing this has been there, or that, like, a decision was made and you just weren't on your best behavior afterwards for the implementation part. And if you go back and sort of try to analyze why you were so frustrated, often it's because of the way that the decision was communicated, or by how they pretended you had influence when you had not. You felt like you needed to be consulted for this decision, and you were not. You see some very obvious flaws in it, and no one is willing to listen. And then it's all the same thing, like, how do we deal, what type of decisions need to be made in what way? And there needs to be, clarity on all of that. It causes a lot of frustrations.
Yeah, I agree. And I think what also is a very powerful thing, because, well, it hardly ever is the case that everyone is agreeing on a certain decision, right? Especially if it's about design decisions, everyone has an opinion. And it doesn't always necessarily need to be that everyone is agreeing, or everyone is like, yay, let's do this. But then a very powerful question, and I think this is also something that we've learned from deep democracy and democratic decision making, like, a very powerful question and to ask is, okay, so what do you need to get along with this decision that's being made? The decision is being made, but what do you need to get along? And very often, by asking that simple question, it turns out that there is just very small or simple thing that one or more persons need. And you can easily do that. And then they can at least get along with the decision. They still don't have to think that it's the best decision ever, but at least they can get along. So that one question, I think that's a very powerful one that we've been asking a lot, at least since I've been doing this. And it's a very powerful one, I think.
It is. And sometimes it doesn't even have anything to do with the proposed design.
No.
Like I noticed at one of my clients, there was some reluctance to go with a specific alternative that we had designed. Yeah, and you ask like, okay, yeah, what will it take to come along in this redesign? And they were like, yeah, I'm just worried. How are we going to test all of this? Which
Right.
it's not the design at all that is bothering them. It's just that they don't see a way to have this properly tested.
Yeah.
And because the system is a mess at that point in time, and they have so much debugging to do and so much support to give to customer, and they want to do that differently, and they want good tests in place. And by just explaining like, hey, this is how we can test everything and make sure everything works in this design, they're satisfied. And you don't even have to change anything in your design. It's just they have worries, and you need to address those worries as well.
Yeah, I agree. And if you don't do it, if you don't ask questions like this, and I think this is exactly the stuff that can go live in the shadow of people, and then when not addressed, it becomes bigger and bigger, and resistance grows and all that sort of stuff, and then eventually it will be way harder to deal with it, because sometimes it's also just a matter of people being heard and being able to express your needs, your concerns, your perspective on things, and this is one way of shining a light, let's say, on these shadows and making sure that we know what's going on there, which is a very, very important aspect of the facilitation part, right? So maybe, there were questions as well from at least Ivan, I think, but maybe, if you have any burning questions, please add them in the chat. But maybe to also dig in a little bit in the facilitation part, right? So well, maybe I'm not steering here, but do you like to facilitate? Do you like being a facilitator in these collaborative modeling sessions? I was going to ask, what do you like about it? But then that's already like...
Yeah, that's already saying I actually like it.
Exactly. I'm not assuming.
Since it's a major part of my job. So the title is consultant, but as a consultant, you need to put on so many hats.
Yeah.
There's coaching involved. I'm a programmer as well, because I show prototypes, all that kind of stuff. And so one of the hats I put on is facilitating. Most of the time, when we're trying to understand the problem, the business processes, all of that. And I have not enjoyed that for a long time. Before I was consultant, I did not really like that, because I felt like the burden was always put on me. But then,
as a facilitator,
as a facilitator, but then I couldn't participate in the discussions. I couldn't share my opinion, because the facilitator is more of a neutral role. And so when I was working inside companies, when it really would affect me, I kind of felt that was frustrating to always, no one wanted to do it, or, well, Gien, you're very good at organizing things. Why don't you organize this? Why don't you facilitate this? And so I didn't like facilitating at some point in my career. I do now, because I understand better what it means to facilitate. I also understand better when I need to put on a different hat as a consultant. When can I share my opinion? How should I share my opinion? Things like that. I'm also better at the people part than I was when I started out. And I feel like I know how to do this now. And that's why I enjoy it now. When I see that there's a conflict, and I find a way to help people pass this conflict so it doesn't escalate. Conflict is basically two people who are disagreeing, and you have that all the time. The problem is that
fighting and screaming, right? That's not how we see conflict.
if you ignore it, it
Yeah,
goes
it can become.
to the door slamming and the yelling and the fighting.
Yes.
And I love it because I can prevent that.
Yeah.
And I'm happy about that.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I like the people part, so that's where we differ, I think. And I like it when I see all these dynamics flying around and thinking, how can I structure this and facilitate that and manage that. But for me, the hardest part when becoming a facilitator and becoming better at it, I always felt the need or the urge or the responsibility to also, apart from the facilitation part, really understand like the domain and what was going on there, and from a more of a content perspective. And I needed to learn to let that go in a way, because when you are facilitating, you don't necessarily need to know every single detail about the content on that part and how it goes and what it does and what would be the best decision. So it's really important as a facilitator to divide these things, right? The facilitation part and what's actually going on in the on a content level. And at the beginning, I really wanted to understand every single detail and everything that was going on and why is this. So I was busy trying to understand the process that usually was new to me when we started to do collaborative modeling. Meanwhile, facilitating the sociodynamics that were going on. So I was exhausted after every facilitation / collaborative modeling session. And then Kenny actually taught me that whenever you feel exhausted after facilitating a collaborative modeling session, you didn't do a great job. That's what he taught me. So that was my biggest lesson there, that I need to be a facilitator when I need to be a facilitator. And then my job is to make sure that the process goes well, and not necessarily that everything that's on the brown paper is the right thing. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that I had when it comes to facilitation. So that's it's an interesting journey, right?
Oh, it is. Life is an interesting journey, Evelyn.
Oh wow, let's.
I felt it was appropriate at the end of the session to say.
No, that's true. Yeah, because I think we should see if there are any questions from the audience as well, right? Before we just
we have a few minutes.
Fill up the entire time. We could, but.
Thank you so much, Evelyn and Gien. I don't think we have any question on the chat. We have a shy audience today. So I wanted to say there was an insightful discussion. You covered a lot of ground on collaborative modeling and its impact as well, challenges, frustration that come with it. Your perspective on decision making have given us a lot to reflect on. So thank you for that. So I think if there is no question, we can conclude the session here. And we hope to see you both again soon, and have a great day.
All right. Thanks for having us.